Enemy power-up detected.
This is Incoming Missile, a MechWarrior Online podcast. 07 MechWarriors, Cozened Indigo here again, and in today's episode, the Incoming Missile crew are taking you back in time. Now, if you listen to the podcast, you probably know that the MWO World Championship, the premier MWO competitive tournament, is being replaced this year with the MWO Comp Championship Series, with PGI opting to hand over the organisation of the tournament to the community. And the awesome Aussies that make up MWO Comp have jumped into the cockpit on this one. Now, MWO Comp have opted for a slightly different structure this year, with some various paths to qualify for the finals. So if you haven't already, be sure to check out the discussion with No Guts, No Galaxy, where Ash, Kraz and Live talk about how this year's competition will play out. Now, we'll also be talking to one or more of the Aussie lads soon to explore the format and the rules a little bit deeper. But for now, we thought we might go forward by going back. Now, this year is going to be different, but do you remember at all what last year was like? A lot has happened between then and now, so we thought that we might re-release our post-comp discussion with MWO Comp's Krasnopesky, who was kind enough to join us post his participation in last year's final series. And he talked to us, of course, about the tournament itself, some of the keyboard-related controversy at the time, and he also talked about what we might expect from this year's 2019's edition of the tournament. Now, Kraz is a real scholar of the game, and it was great to hear his insight at the time into comp, particularly considering now that he's actually part of the triumvirate that are bringing this year's tournament to life. So it was a good discussion at the time, and an interesting one to listen to in retrospect, given what we are now facing moving into this year's tournament. So enjoy this listen back to last year, and remember that qualifying has begun for this year's tournament. You can jump into the comp queue with your team during the competition windows that exist and fight for some of that elo that might qualify you. Be sure to head along to the MWO Comp Discord, because that'll have all the announcements that relate to this year's tournament, and that includes when those competition windows are. They're posting links about specifically organised fight nights to make sure that teams all jump on at the same time so that you have someone to play. And of course, it details those invitational tournaments that are happening and being held for some of the teams that are able to qualify through that pathway. And yeah, jump on, of course, if you do want to be involved and you haven't got a team. There's also some links in there to get you connected with other people that want to play. Remember, there are some sweet rewards for playing just 20 odd games. Now remember, you can also support the tournament itself by heading along to Matcherino, and you can stump up some cash that will go directly for prize money for the people that will win and finish quite high in the tournament. And of course, taking that option means that there are some pretty sweet rewards that you can cash in, including coming on and guest hosting this podcast with myself and Captain Cat. As always, a big thank you to our patrons: Dan N, Freerider AU, John Doe Iowa, MWO Comp, Jacob Sawyer, Shaky Snake, Bryos, Chillgaps and Waterdeer, Knight of the Day, Nakoro Doomguard, and Robin Merkley. Thank you guys, we really appreciate what you do in supporting us to keep this going. Right, let's get into it.
Today we're joined by Krasnopesky. Krasnopesky. Let's just call him Kraz. Of First Jaguar Guards, who was recently in Vancouver to compete in the finals of MechWarrior World Championships 2018. So Kraz, how you doing, mate?
Yeah, going well. It's a bit late over here, but apart from that, it's good.
Where are you holding up?
Currently in Calgary, about an hour's flight away from Vancouver, visiting a mate.
All right, Kraz. So, what's your story? How did you come to MechWarrior, and also what led you into competitive play?
Like a lot of people, I've played MechWarrior for a long time. I believe I first started playing MechWarrior in MechWarrior 2, the PC.
So pretty much first one that most people remember.
Yeah, I didn't quite get MechWarrior 1, original one, but I got MechWarrior 2. I had MechWarrior 3, which I used to play with like a joystick. I didn't play MechWarrior 4. I missed that one for some reason. But I did play a lot of Mech Commander Gold, which was one of my favorite MechWarrior games.
Right, RTS, right?
Yeah, so that was a great game. I really enjoyed that, and I have recently tried to get sort of a new, not a new MechWarrior, but a revamped Mech Commander that people have done with the whole heap of mods and everything, but I couldn't quite get it working. So that's going to be something I'll try and fix up on my computer in the future.
Nice. And so when did you come into MechWarrior Online, in open beta or?
No, it was a little bit after open beta. I started. It would have been, can't remember exactly now, but it would have been something like 2013. I'm sure you can see when you started somewhere in your profile. And I sort of just played on and off casually for the first couple of years. And then I came back to the game. I think it was in either season 2 or season 3, like when they first started the leaderboards. Just after they nerfed the Kodiak 3 for the first time, they didn't nerf it directly, but they changed the Clan Ultra autocannons from being able to shoot all 4 at once to only being able to shoot 2. That's when I started playing, and I basically haven't really stopped playing since then. That was in 2016.
Right. And so what's your trajectory from there through to being a top damage scorer for First Jags?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm quite a top damage scorer. that was for maybe just the first 4 games of the semis, I think. I pretty quickly joined Clan Crossfire, which you now lead. And then we played, I can't remember exactly which season of MRBC it was, but it was Division 3 AP. We played an MRBC. And then shortly after that, I became the unit leader of Crossfire, which I led for a year, and we did a fair few comps.
Yeah, full disclosure, Kraz did used to be my boss.
Still am, but don't worry about that. And then I joined First Jaguar Guards at the start of this year. I don't know exactly when, but it sort of was a slow transition as I made sure that Crossfire didn't collapse in on itself, so to speak.
That was left in good hands.
Yes, left in very good hands and it's been quite successful since then, I believe. And then, so all this year I've been playing with the First Jaguar Guards, a few comps and things.
So, Chris, it's obviously awesome to talk to you, and we were very keen to, I guess, get some first-hand experience of MechCon, of competing at MechCon, and obviously of those games themselves. So I did want to, ask you a few questions, of course, about the games that went down, First Jaguar Guards games, and of course MP and Eon fighting it out for 1 and 2. But before we did get into that, this year has been a little bit different in regards to the World Champs. It was stock mode. It was very limiting. It was pretty almost controversial, I guess. A lot of people had a lot of opinions about what it would be like. If anything, it was at least a dramatic change. So we'd be really keen to talk to you a little bit about what that was like. I mean, to begin with, at least, what was your opinion on stock mode, on the change, and your experience of playing under this new rule set?
Well, initially when it was announced, like most people, I was a little bit upset. I didn't like the idea of stock mode being the primary sort of competition. The World Championship is the biggest competition, obviously, in MechWarrior.
Yeah.
I wasn't too fond of stock mode being revolving around that. But I think that it would probably be, I think it went better than if it was just completely open. I'll put it that way. Because if it was just completely open with every mech in the game and every weapon system and full customization, you tend to find that mechs tend towards very glass cannon builds, to output the most amount of damage ever. And you would find something like there'd be just say 3 machine gun lights, a streak boat, and then depending on the map and the play style, 3 assault mechs of varying capabilities in most games. And the games would be decided over very minute things like, the enemy team's piranha was caught out by the streak boat and insta-killed, for instance.
Yeah. Or
the enemy team's piranha got behind your line and crit out the weapons on 2 of your assaults instantly and things like that. It'd be, and while people might argue that might take more skill per se, I think it also lends a bit more just randomness to the game, which is not necessarily a good thing, the competition. Stock mode itself is is, as many people have said, a lot slower. But I also think there are some arguments to say that it can be more entertaining to watch, and it can, in a way, be a little bit easier for people to follow, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'd definitely be one of those that the slow pace for me made it easier to observe and at least easier to follow, and it was a little bit easier to see what strategies needed to be implemented and how they were being implemented. You know, you talked about kind of that randomness or maybe the margin for error that just a piranha getting hit by streaks or critting out a weapon can decide the whole drop. That pace of comp at that level, that is something that whilst you appreciate the skill that's involved, it is a little bit hard to watch. That slowdown, I think, worked out pretty well overall and maybe was a net positive for the spectators. Do you think PGI intended that when they made the change? And, you know, for you as a player and for you guys as a team at that very top level, was it painful to play?
Yeah, it is a little bit painful to play, especially. I mean, the Wolfhound I run in solo queue typically runs 147 kilometers an hour, and the one in stock mode runs 97, and it's got it's probably got less than 25% of the cooling, which can be quite frustrating. And the Wolfhound, I think, is one of the better stock mechs, the nicer ones with an actually sort of decent loadout and armor distribution. But I did have experience, not in the actual competition games, but in training piloting the Annihilators, and that is not something I would wish upon anyone. To pilot those 32 kph Annihilators with half the armor they're meant to is incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, we had a lot of drops where the position of the Annihilator decided the game because they were so slow.
We had games during the open season where we tried to stop Data from getting any damage at all. If we could rush and kill the enemy quick enough, he would never make it to the fight. It's a little mini game we put into ourselves as we were grinding through the queue.
Do you think, Chris, that you've kind of alluded to the fact that it was a little bit harder to make it work, and you know, use the Annie as an example because of how slow it was? I mean, with what PGI were trying to achieve with the change, it did make a better spectacle for watching you and those top teams go at it. But competition wide, and say for a team like Clan Crossfire, who were competing a little bit lower down the tree, we did find it tremendously difficult, and for lower skilled pilots like myself, it only accentuated the fact that I was lower skilled. Overall, you know, what do you think the change meant for competition as a whole? Even though it was a better spectacle, so more people watched it, did it have the right influence on the people that were playing it?
Well, I don't know the exact statistics, but I think you may be wrong when you say more people watched it, because I don't know, again, I don't know the exact numbers, but I have a feeling that less people watched it actually than the past years.
Yeah.
But regardless of that, it may or may not have been a better spectacle. It seems to have been. But in terms of the actual competition and competitors, I think that it was a good shake-up. I think it worked in that it sort of, I don't like to say it, but it did make it the competition a bit more fresh, I suppose. It's not a word I like to associate with the stock mode. But yes, in terms of the hopes of PGI, I think Russ said this, that he wanted more like quote unquote beer league teams to participate. I think that wasn't quite correct, because as you increase the time to kill of mechs, so does the skill gap widens, I suppose you could say.
Yeah.
Because if you have to trade repeatedly, you know, a better team and a better player will trade repeatedly better. So that gap will just continue to increase and increase, where it becomes almost impossible. You can't just get lucky and win it and win the. You can get lucky in the trade, but it doesn't mean as much. The amount of luck you could have in having a critical shot or something reduces as the time to kill increases. So I think in terms of actually competing, it didn't help, I suppose, like, you know, bring in the teams. There's a skill disparity, and it certainly didn't help in terms of teams willing to compete, because I think this was by far the lowest year in terms of teams in the competition.
And you spoke about your own sort of internal mini game. I quite enjoyed, as the sort of drop caller captain, the mini game of pouring through those lists of the available stock mechs and trying to work out of those bad options which were the least bad. How about you?
We did a fair amount of, I suppose, theory crafting and testing, especially when it was sort of just announced that it was going to be stock. I haven't looked at a compiled list yet of all the mechs that we used. I presume that someone will make something like that eventually. if they haven't already, and I just haven't come across it. But a lot of the mechs were very common across the drops. I mean, there was slight variations in the top end, but not a great deal. If you just have a look at the mechs that were played at MechCon, with a few exceptions of surprising ones that were pulled out the last minute that worked quite well. An example being Eon's Dragon on Grimplexus. Most of the mechs were sort of pretty stock standard, I suppose, by then.
That's nice. So it's a really interesting perspective, Chris. I mean, you've kind of talked about two competing things there, that it was a good spectacle, but perhaps it didn't. It encouraged people to enjoy watching it. You didn't necessarily get more people watching it, and you didn't necessarily get more people playing it. I mean, so if you were to rank it overall, I guess, and particularly given that you've got so much experience with, the other competitions as well, your roles with Battle for Midway and MRBC and stuff like that, previously being a captain and all of that, how do you think it has fared overall? I mean, if you were to give it a rating when you're taking all of those things into account and the impact that it's had on the comp scene?
It's a bit difficult to give it an actual, I suppose, a number rating, but I would say that it hasn't been completely negative. We'll put it that way. Yeah. I think it would have been worse, as I mentioned before, if it was just a completely open system. I don't think that if it was just a complete open any mech, any sort of build, with the tonnage limits that they had and such, I don't think it would have been better. I think it would have been worse in that case. But in saying that, I do think it would be a mistake to repeat the stock mode again next year, which I have spoken to a few PGI people, and they were, they're thinking the same thing, that they won't repeat stock mode next year. But again, nothing is set in stone at all at this point.
That's gratifying to hear. And I think potentially a little bit later we'll talk about, what kind of learnings maybe we can take from this, and maybe some other, maybe there's some other options out there of ways that you can take what's good about this and put it into a more open kind of game format.
One suggestion I did hear at MechCon, I can't remember who it was, it might have been one of the 228 Wild ones who did attend, was that next year you could potentially have the same tech base with the same 3025 or whatever tech they called it, with a few extra chassis, but have the ability to use the mech lab with that technology. Might be a good middle ground, perhaps.
At least the stock mode did have that refresh that you were saying, Kraz, and if nothing else, it might have brought competition back to the forefront, to people's minds. And certainly the quality of the finals games was enough, regardless of the format. It was enough to remind people just how good it can be to see MechWarrior at that level.
Yeah, I hope it's had a positive impact. I mean, the last year hasn't definitely not been the best year for competition. The sort of I suppose comp in MechWarrior online really peaked at when I sort of started playing around 2016 and early 2017. They had a peak in terms of the number of people watching comp and the number of teams participating in competitions. This 2018 year has seen a definite reduction in teams in viewership across the different competitions. But we'll just have to see what comes in the next following years. I very much doubt there will be necessarily a large revival in comp without significant changes or updates to the game.
We certainly want to talk to you about those changes, but before we did, if what we'd want to see in comp is at least a repeat of the spectacle that we did see at MechCon, because, I thought the games were a fantastic advertisement of what comp can be, and it almost doesn't matter the format. When you put those high-skilled players and those teams together, then you get something awesome. So it's going to be the time where we talk to you a little bit about those games, Kraz. But I mean, before we talk about the games specifically, what was the environment like? I mean, it was the first time there for First Jaguar Guards. I mean, can you set the scene a little bit for the listeners about what it was like being up there on stage and at the event?
Well, MechCon itself, I quite enjoyed. I thought they had a nice setup. It seemed I hadn't been, of course, to the other two, but I'd seen them on stream, and the venue they had for the past ones was a lot smaller, and they did run them over one day. Even myself, just watching the games on stream, it was tiring just watching the games throughout the entire day on stream, let alone not even playing the games. So the fact that they had MechCon running over 2 days in a larger venue, I think worked really well. MechCon itself and the competitors in the competition had a really good sort of vibe to it. Everything was functioning quite well, I would say, for the most part. Playing up on stage was not. I don't think it it didn't how do I put it? It didn't affect me, or it didn't change my game overly. I'm sort of used to living in the middle of a city where there's often quite a lot of noise and distractions and things. So it didn't affect me too much. I was more concentrated on the game, but I did hear from some of my other team members that they found certain things a little bit distracting. A very funny, but something that was true was, they had some big speakers set up so people could hear. You could feel the vibrations in the stage when there was an airstrike going off from the bass and the speakers.
Some haptic feedback.
Yeah, so you could literally feel the vibration through the stage. So you'd feel the start of the vibration, and you sort of go, oh crap! Like, is an airstrike going to come and hit me? A little bit of a funny moment.
On that same vein, like I wondered when I was watching the stream, like, obviously I can hear the echo of the announcers saying, okay, and he's moving up to Kappa and hopefully he doesn't get noticed. And I'm thinking, can they hear? Can the teams hear him saying that?
Yes, but it would be incredibly hard to isolate something like that because you have the headphones on and they are noise cancelling headphones, and you have 8 or 7 other people in a TeamSpeak with you on comms, and you have turned your sound up in game so you can hear mech footsteps if you need to or whatever. So even though the announcers were loud, it was quite muffled. You could hear the announcers speaking when the game wasn't on, like, when you're doing the map banner thing and people were relatively quiet. But actually in the game, you'd have to be making extreme concerted effort to be able to hear and say and understand what they were saying.
So just before we get and talk about the games themselves, we're talking about hardware. So what was it like playing with, pre-made computers and, new headphones, potentially mice and keyboards and zero ping as well?
Yeah, the hardware was fine. It was a bit annoying because the graphical settings are completely locked on the MechCon client, so you couldn't change any at all. So that was a bit interesting to sort of be unable to change those graphical settings and having more distractions, I suppose. Like when you go drop into Rubalite, there's a lot of sort of visible wind sort of shifting all around the map, which I didn't like. There's things like that you can't get rid of. In terms of the hardware, well, the mouse that they use is the mouse that I use, so that was fine. I didn't even have to use my mouse I brought. They used the Razer Death Adder Elite, so I just used the mouse they had there. I did have to change the keyboard because even though they used a Razer keyboard, I used a different one, which had different keys, and it felt way too different. But most of the competitors brought their own mouse and keyboard and mouse pad as well, which can be quite important. Funny thing was the actual mouse pads they had were just like a standard size one, like you might see at a library. So even though they were a Razer mouse pad, like it was like a really small mouse pad, and it's almost impossible to use something like that in a game like MechWarrior or any competitive first-person shooter, really.
And what about the zero ping? Did you notice the difference?
Yes, I did. I did notice the difference. I mean, I usually play at around 160 ping on the NA server, or moving up to 200 and something odd on EU. Like the laser vomit, which is the only weapon system I used. I only used 4 medium lasers and 1 large laser the entire tournament. Was more precise, and you could get cleaner burns in on particularly light mechs, like things like their legs. But you could also, of course, your enemy could do the same. So it was all even. You could shoot more precise, but they could shoot more precise. I don't think it gave anyone an edge, so to speak, or anything. It was just a little bit different. You just had to, how do I put it? You had to make sure you had to land your shots because, there's very good chance that your enemy will land the shots. Whereas sometimes when you're playing with 160 ping and a light mech in particular, the enemy might land their shot, but the shot doesn't really land. It doesn't reg properly. So you only get like half damage, for instance. Hit reg in MechWarrior Online can work either way, it seems. Sometimes it's beneficial to you, sometimes it isn't, and it's just luck of the draw. Sometimes nothing seems to reg in you, and pilots can always will shoot straight but still not do damage to you. Other times, you can't seem to land shots on the enemy light, and their SRMs like clean hit you in the CT.
Those bloody commandos.
Oh, the commandos don't seem to register damage regardless of ping. They've got problems with their hitboxes, especially around their torsos. That's happened for years. Like they absorb shots because of something. There must be something wrong with the meshing of them, of their hitboxes. They must have holes in the hitboxes or something.
All right, Chris, so you've set the scene for us. You and the team are lined up. The sound's been muffled. You've sorted out your keyboard, your mouse. You guys are ready to go. You're a little bit nervous, but you guys are all pretty cool cucumbers and ready to go. Let's talk about drop 1. Let's talk about keyboard gate. tell us it from your perspective, man. Give us the rundown of what it was like for you, for the team, of winning convincingly in that first drop, and then kind of having that redacted.
Well, from my perspective, I think I high-fived Dargor, who was on my left, and then I started talking about which maps we were going to ban next, and then someone tapped me on the shoulders and said redrop, and then walked away.
And was that a ref?
Yeah, that was a ref. Yeah, so that was the information I received, and then a bit of confusion ensued. But regardless, we spoke about it, and it was going to be a redrop, and then we redropped. And that was a bit devastating, I suppose, having our first match and our first win taken away. In terms of what sort of happened and unfolded, we sort of got more information about that later after the matches. But from my understanding, it was identified early that there was a problem with one of the EMP players' keyboards. The EMP, they basically told them as soon as there was a problem early in the match that there was a problem. And for some reason that I cannot fathom, the referees decided that they would sort that out after the drop.
Yeah, so talk us through that, Chris, because that's one of the points that we wanted to talk to you about. I mean, you've obviously got a lot of experience in comp, in reffing, in being admin, in helping structure comp games and make-up rules and that kind of stuff. Should that have been the approach? What should have been the alternative approach?
Well, this is some feedback I gave directly to the organisers of the tournament. In the tournament client, which is also the MechCon client, you've got 3 spectator slots. So during MechCon, 2 of the slots were taken up by the shoutcasters, Bandit and MDM, and the 3rd slot was just not used, not utilised. And for some reason, the referees who were standing behind us and quite a good few metres away, you basically had to walk through the crowd to get to the shoutcasters, did not have any way of contacting the shoutcasters or talking between themselves. They didn't have any microphones or on them. And they didn't have any direct way to actually influence the game, which I find is extremely strange. What should have happened is there should be one referee in that 3rd spectator slot with the power to pause the game if necessary, and that's what should have occurred. And it's not even about things like competition, how it's run in MechWarrior. It's about how competitions are run, including sporting competitions. For instance, in football or soccer, depending on where you're from, if a referee is going to give someone a yellow card, they have to give it to them before the next play starts. If play is resumed, you can't go, oh, this guy did this thing 5 minutes ago, I'm going to give him a yellow card now. It just doesn't work that way. And the same concept should apply. If there's a problem that's going to cause a redrop, the game should be first paused. And if it needs discussion, and then it should be redropped. You should not allow it to go through to the end.
I mean, you said you threw a high five. You started talking about the, what's next, thinking that one was under the belt. And that's the real kicker, isn't it? It's that feeling of getting off on the right foot, or that feeling of victory, starting the way you wanted, and then having that taken away. That's the reason why you need to call it mid-match, so that no one goes through that feeling. I mean, is that what you think?
It was even spoken to us before the matches began from the referees that if there was a problem, you need to speak up, and then they'll take the necessary actions then and there, and that they literally said there wouldn't be necessarily, I suppose, redrops from things that were said afterwards, which is fine. Don't get me wrong, there was no wrongdoing on EMP's part in terms of this. They did the right thing. They identified a problem. It was all the problem from the referee's perspective, where I don't know why the decisions were made the way they were, but they were made, and I think it was definitely the wrong decision in this case.
And not only that, but I'd like to mention as well that you guys did a map ban. You went in, you picked a map, and you went in there with a strategy that you guys had probably been developing for weeks, if not months. And then that was basically spoiled by having to do it again and not getting to choose that map.
Yes, 100% it was. That strategy that we did on Rubelite, we wanted to pick Rubelite against EMP on that team and implement that strategy because it was a counter strat for what EMP did on that drop, and it would only work once properly, and it worked. We ganked their light on the north cap as we'd planned, and that light mech happened to be the locust, EMP's locust, and on a large map like Rubelite, to lose a light mech, particularly your locust, within the first 3 minutes or 4 minutes of the game it's very devastating to do that. It's very difficult to come back from something like that. And then having to redrop that map the strategy we had developed for that particular case, it almost worked. We only lost by 5 points the next one, but it clearly didn't work anywhere near as well because they knew what we were going to do or what potentially we could have done.
That was a really tight game, and it was, although I was, obviously supporting you guys, I mean, it was a tight game and it was exciting to watch. And because it was a redrop, it was particularly hard to take that 5 tickets. So close.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Regardless of what's happened on this first drop, it wouldn't have changed the outcome. EMP were definitely the better team than us on this particular weekend. So it wouldn't. I don't think it would have made a difference at all in terms of the actual competition or the results of it. But it was a disappointing start to the tournament.
It didn't affect your momentum or your morale in the team?
Oh, yes, of course it did. But I don't think it mattered that much. Like, I don't think it was a big enough effect to have, I don't think if it didn't have happened, we would come second. I'll put it that way. I think we were going based on our performance of how we played at MechCon. I think we were always going to come third.
And a convincing third team there, I have to say.
No, thank you.
I mean, it's a good perspective, Chris, and I think probably what we did see from EMP is they did get better as the tournament went on. There was some talk about whether they would be able to.
Did they though?
Well, their cohesion, I think, was definitely better. I mean, they ran into Eon ultimately, but I do think they were better from where they were in the final 12.
Oh, I'm not sure I agree.
So take us through that, man. What how did you view their team, and if they didn't get better, why do you think that was the case?
Yeah, EMP may have got a little better, but I don't think it was from cohesion throughout the weekend. I think that was a product of their training and preparation from the semis. And I don't think they got immensely better, personally. I mean, in the games of Eon versus EMP were, even though there were quite a few close games in there, Eon was much stronger and they convincingly won. I think that personally, our team did not have adequate preparation for MechCon, and I think we played worse than when we did in the semis, and that was more of a factor in the results.
What do you think that came down to? I mean, was it the pressure of the stage? Was it the travel?
Well, they were factors. I don't think they were the main factors. I think the primary factors were lack of adequate preparation from our team. So leading up to the event, I don't think we did enough scrims. I don't think we did enough lobbies. I don't think that some members of our team played enough just in general. And I think in the end that showed.
Bandit and MDM talked about the fact that Eon did a lot of scrims outside of their unit, that they sought out other units to scrim with. Is that something that JGX would potentially look to do, say, for next year?
Yeah, I mean, we ideally we'd like to participate more in some player-run comps throughout the year because we did miss Battle for Midway, as like JGX didn't play in Battle for Midway, which was right before MechCon. And yeah, I've already started to contact a few teams to see if they'd be interested in scrims next year. We'd like to get them going at least semi-regularly at the start of the year, and then moving on to, once we know what the exact rules of the World Cup are, then moving on to a bit more regularly, of course.
So any team captains out there listening, do contact Krasnopesky for some scrims with JGX.
Yeah, Discord's the best way.
Now, I did want to add at this point too, when we're kind of talking about these differences, between how JGX went and how EMP went and how Eon went, we are talking about some very high-level teams. So, when you're talking about the difference between these teams, it can seem big, but when you've got these guys competing at that level, it can take something relatively small and it can make a big difference because, these guys are just that damn good. Those 2 drops out of the way, Kraz, Rubelite, Redacted, you guys then went into Canyon in drop 2 and then Grim in drop 3. Is there anything that you wanted to tell us about those drops or how you think those went?
Some members of First Jaguar have reviewed those. I briefly had a look at them while I was at MechCon. I don't think for those particular 2 drops there was anything necessarily outstanding.
Pasha was pretty outstanding, I have to say.
Yeah, well, individual parts may have been outstanding, but I mean, in terms of the overall teams, we just lost both those games fairly convincingly. There were particular mistakes made in our movements, just little, like you described before. They could be very minor, but they were there and they were enough to cause us to lose.
It's interesting as a spectator to try and, it's really easy and obvious to see where all the mechs are on the battlefield when you're watching, but of course when you're in the cockpit, you're only getting all those targeting info that's relayed to you by teammates and things people were telling you in your headphones. And so there's an interesting disconnect there between what we can see as spectators and what you can see on the battlefield yourself.
It's also one of those things. It's hindsight is always 2020. So when you look back at a recording of you playing, you go, "Oh, it's very obvious what you should have done here, here, and here," and it wasn't done. But yeah, you're correct in saying that it is a bit more difficult in the moment, and that comes down to team cohesion, communication, which comes from practice, regular practice, and preparation for the matches.
And you talked about practice and prep a lot, and I wanted to ask you quickly about when you were in Vancouver. You got some time between the games. I believe you had a room that you could use for playing and discussing and things like that. And were you able to come up with much strategy in those times and get some good practice in? Or was it mostly trying to distract yourself before the next one?
There were no computers in those rooms, so there was no opportunity to practice. But yeah, there was plenty of time to talk about our strategies. So we initially, of course, went through our own strategies and what we had prepared and made sure everyone knew exactly what they were doing for each particular drops. And then after the games, we had those rooms to talk about what happened in the drops and then what happened in the other games and what we should change or modify or do to improve on the situation. But yeah, there was very little time to actually prepare in terms of playing the actual MechWarrior game. I think Eon, the majority of Eon's team, I believe, got to Vancouver a few days before most other people. I think they went to an internet cafe to do a bit of preparation, which was probably a smart move on their behalf because it would have helped with the jet lag as well as get some preparation in.
You've mentioned it obviously a few times here, Chris, but would that be the key takeaway for you? Because I think for listeners that haven't either competed in comp or certainly haven't competed to that level, is it hard to understate just how important that prep is when you're dealing with such teams that are really, really close together?
Well, if you look at EMP's success over the last 3 years, and probably going back a bit more, it's all come down from the fact that they've had 8v8 internal lobbies for the past 3 years, and they've managed to maintain that. If they had not put in that effort, and they would not have been 2 times world champion and silver medalist this year. Yeah. It just won't occur. And I mean, you do need, of course, quite a decent amount of skill to be able to make it up to the level. But then once you get up to the level, then regular practice and just playing the game is what's going to make the difference between these teams. You could look at 1v1, so for example, right? When you get towards the top level, the 1v1s are very close and they can go either way many times. And there are little edges you can get, which often come down to the mech lab. But the 1v1s generally don't require as much situational awareness and cohesion. But when you have 8 people, then you all need to have a high level of cohesion and understanding of each other's gameplay style, I suppose, and roles.
And Eon talked about it directly as well there, I guess, about, those words cohesion and synergy and just understanding what each other are doing and sometimes not even needing to talk about it, just being constantly watching the mini-map and having that situational awareness. You did talk about the 1v1s and the small difference in pilot skill. I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here, Chris, because when we did talk to Bandit and MDM, obviously they talked about your performance and just how strong it had been leading up. You have been one of the top pilots this year across the comp scene, even with just how small that difference can be. You obviously did a lot of damage, had a lot of kills, and whilst the finals themselves crowded you out a little bit in the influence that you could have, I mean, can you take us a little bit inside it, man? Why are you playing so well at the moment? What's the difference?
Yeah, again, it's just the preparation. I mean, I built a wolfhound that was very similar to the stock one, which I was going to play all comp, and I played about 400 hours of it throughout the year in the quick play queue.
Wow!
And then, just that preparation just gets you a better understanding of the particular chassis. And I made it's a 6 medium laser wolfhound, with a big XL engine and double heat sinks and all that, but it still has the same weapon systems and it still has the same agility profile now that with the engine desync. So it still operates in much the same way as the stock one I was using. And I think just that preparation was very helpful. A lot of players play many mechs and it comes down to game time as well. If you've got, it's like a sport or any competition, whatever, regardless of what the actual medium of it is. If you're doing a lot more of it, provided you're doing it right, it's going to give you an edge over people who aren't doing it very much.
I think that's a key point that you've made as well, is that you've got to do it right. I could put 1,000 hours into something and still not be as good as you if I don't criticize myself and think about how I could do it better and all that kind of stuff as well,
Yeah, that's a very important part. And I mean, being able to identify your own weaknesses can be very difficult, especially I find in anything. Once you hit a certain skill level, it can be very difficult to know where you need to go forward without external help. Many of the first Jaguar guards have played MechWarrior comp quite a lot longer than I have. Some of them like Pasha, for instance, and Data have played comp in MechWarrior 4 for a very, very long time. And I think it's important that not only to have self-reflection, but also to, have discussions with other pilots and other players around, what areas you should look at improving and where you think weaknesses lie. I think that sort of thing's important because you're right in that you can put in thousands of hours, but if they're not effective hours, then it's not wasted time if you're having fun, of course, because it is a video game, but it's not going to help you improve your performance.
Yeah, it's a good philosophy for life, I think. Yeah, I guess whilst JGX finished third on the board, I think you guys finished first for handsomeness and style, at least.
Yeah, some of the Italians did enjoy their collared shirts and long sleeves after the competition was finished.
You're doing all right, Chris. Did you have singlets and stubbies on, or maybe some jandals? Classic Australian cultural garb.
It was a bit too cold to have to be wearing jandals, as you call them.
Thongs, as Australians call them. In New Zealand, thongs are something else entirely.
In most of the world, thongs are something else entirely.
And you also probably wouldn't wear them out to town, yeah.
Oh, it depends what sort of night you're after, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it is Vancouver after all.
You pulled back the curtain there a bit, Kraz. You guys hit the town afterwards, huh?
Yeah. Quite a few of us did. We went out and had some drinks at some pubs and things around town. Yeah, Saturday night was more of a dinner with not very much alcohol because we all wanted to be nice and sharp for the next day's competition. But Sunday night was quite good. A lot of the competitors and just other people, organisers and refs and other people attending MechCon sort of went out to various places, had some nice socialising. It was quite a good night.
Oh, that's awesome to hear.
Yeah, look, that was one of the key takeaways, and we covered it kind of in part one of our recap, was it really did seem as though the vibe there was fantastic, and the camaraderie and the sportsmanship, I think, that the teams showed was just fantastic. I mean, yeah, I think that added to the spectacle when you could see that you guys were going hard in the paint competing, but afterwards it was handshakes and back slaps, and it really did seem like it was a good vibe there. So yeah, I think that came through.
Yeah. The feel of not just the competition, but the MechCon in general was very good. Had a very good, friendly sort of atmosphere, and it was nice. Yeah, it was very nice. It definitely made the whole experience of the thing much more enjoyable than if it was, I suppose, people being angry at each other or not getting along.
And one thing more that I did want to ask you before we moved on, which is every year I hear people talk about the food and that the catering's really good. What is so great about this catering?
Yeah, the catering was phenomenal. It's almost the sort of food you'd expect to receive at not necessarily a high-end restaurant, but a sort of an upper middle restaurant. It was really good quality food. It was very good quality food.
That makes me want to go twice as much.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I mean, for the competitors at least, we all received the VIP bracelets, which there were a very limited number of, and that gave you access to an unlimited bar.
Now I want to go 3 times as much.
Yeah, so that was definitely a good point.
But potentially, those tickets are pretty good value when you consider that you get 2 days of entertainment and food in an open bar and all this other stuff. Obviously all the things that people go there to see, the mech pods and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. If you can buy if you're interested in going, you definitely want to get the VIP ticket if you can manage to get it, because I do believe they were sold out quite fast. The VIP tickets, they were only a very limited number. They're actually selling, it was something like 50 or something. But you definitely want to get one of those if you can.
All right, with the MechCon 2018 in the rearview mirror in the finals, we'd be remiss if we didn't take the chance, Krez, to talk to you about maybe what both the World Champs next year should and might look like, and probably even more than that, maybe what comp could look like moving up and leading up into that, including, of course, player-run and player-organised tournaments. Can you give us just a brief rundown, I guess, about where you think the comp, the health of the comp scene, where you think the comp scene should go, and this time next year, when we're reflecting on the World Champs, what do you think they should look like?
Well, I suppose I'll start out by mentioning that there definitely will be a World Championship again next year, because I have heard some rather cynical people say, there might not even be one next year. That's all but 100% certain that there actually will be one. As to what format it will be in is undecided even by PGI at this point in time. From my understanding, PGI will have discussions next year, probably around February or March, as to what actual format it should go. At this stage, from the indications I got, it most likely won't be a stock tournament. But in saying that, I'm not sure if it'll be just necessarily an open tournament either. It'll be interesting to see what they eventually decide. In terms of the comp scene in general, like I said, it has been in decline, unfortunately. And I think until there are major changes to the game, like major changes to the game, I think it will continue to be in decline. But in saying that, it'll still be healthy enough to continue running for quite a number of years, in my opinion. We are, and when I say we, the Battle for Midway admin team are looking at running not necessarily a Battle for Midway competition, but some sort of player-run competition next year around generally in March, April sort of timeframe. So that's something that people who are interested should keep an eye out for. All that organisation will most likely be run through the MRBC Discord and possibly the tournament page, as we've done with past Battle for Midways. But that'll all be linked and sent to the PGI forums and Reddit and things. And generally, I go and contact past teams to let them know in case they've missed it as well. Particularly some of the teams who don't speak English as a first language. Yeah, I'm hoping there's more than just those two tournaments. Hopefully, someone will step up and do some other sort of tournament as well in an appropriate time throughout the year, but we'll just have to see, won't we?
And I'd really throw my support behind anyone listening who wants to take their game to the next level. You don't have to be a top player to play in competitive. You just have to try hard. There's multiple divisions of BFM, and your team will be able to find a space that fits them. We talked about what it takes to be a good player, and really at some point in your trajectory, playing competitive is one of the things that it takes to be good. Yeah,
I do know a few players who are very good pilots and haven't played much comp at all. Definitely a vast majority of the better players in this game will gravitate towards playing competition in some form.
One thing I really notice is that there's a lot of pilots who are individually very good and would be an asset to a team, but not necessarily the kind of pilots it would take to make a really good competitive player, because they're used to playing on their own, they're used to relying on themselves.
Yeah, there's a whole other subset to playing competitively in like an 8v8 sort of competition. You can be a very good 1v1 pilot, or a very good you can be the top 0.1% in the pug queue. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll be the top 0.1% of the competition, because there is a whole range of different skill sets you have to learn. And in particular, one of those skill sets, especially when you're starting out with comp, is listening and following instructions and being willing to accept other people's instructions as opposed to just doing what you want to do.
Even if it leads to your death.
Yeah. And sometimes you will just have to just throw yourself in there to win the match, even if it's going to get your mech destroyed. That happens all the time. Yeah, we saw that a lot in even at MechCon with mechs holding onto the caps for as long as they could, even though it'll mean their death. The win is the most important thing as opposed to the personal performance.
I guess the one thing we can say about comp does require that subset of skills that you're talking about, Kraz. And the good thing about that is that it is rewarding in a different way as well. The emphasis on teamwork means that you're getting something else out of comp that you can't really get even through group queue or faction play. And that's kind of regardless of your skill level, get a team together and get into these some of these player-run comps, because you'll start to get rewards out of the game that you haven't up until now. And for me, as a kind of low-skilled comp player, that's it's a completely different buzz, and I really enjoy it for that reason. Even though I'm not capable of competing at that real high level, there's just something else about comp that makes it rewarding. So moving into 2019, everyone that's listening, if you're not already, do hook up with the team and do seek out some of these comps, because it is a completely different game and rewarding in a completely different way.
Yeah, I find it by far the most rewarding part of this game, playing in comp, playing proper organised matches. And as you mentioned, like if people want to start out, We have divisions in the player run competition for a reason. There's designed to give everyone of any skill level a chance to play against people of similar skill level, so it's not just completely being destroyed without being able to have any fun or do anything.
Absolutely. If I can play it, then anyone listening can play it, because you're probably better than me at the game. Okay, so just don't.
You're underrating yourself a bit there, Cozen.
Well, you can play.
He does it constantly. He does it
play
constantly.
your part.
It's a Kiwi
you can play
thing.
your part in a team, and you can contribute by listening and going where you're supposed to be going. So, someone at your skill level, Chris, you almost have to have comp. When you get as good at the game as yourself and everyone was in those finals, you have to have comp to be able to be tested. So, it does play a vital role in the game, in the scene. We want those top players like yourself to be able to compete and provide that spectacle. But for lack of a better word, we also need those grassroots tournaments. We need people playing at all those divisions to make the whole scene healthy. So, yeah, let's hope that we do see, if not some growth, then at least people are not moving away from comp and still wanting to come along and play.
Yeah, it's quite well said.
All right, well, that has been a fantastic insight into MechCon and into the finals. Again, to get it from the viewpoint of someone that was there. And
Jaguar's mouth?
Yeah, I was going to say the horse's mouth, and then I was going to say the Italian stallion's mouth, but that doesn't quite match up either. But to get it from the mouth of someone that's been there and done it is a fantastic insight, Chris. So thanks for coming on the podcast today. Thanks for giving us that view of MechCon from up on the stage and playing those games. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, man, or say to the listeners?
No, not particularly. I think we've said it all. Thanks for having me on the show. It was a pleasure doing the podcast.
We've got to ask you before you go. It's become a bit of a tradition now. What's your favourite mech?
What's my favourite mech?
Wolfhound? Never play the Wolfhound again.
No, you'll probably see me in the Wolfhound. This is where the competitive side of me comes out. My favourite mech is whichever one performs the best.
Yeah. I knew you would say that, Chris. All right, everyone, if you do see Krez in his stock Wolfhound, make sure you do run the other way. And we would certainly encourage everyone out there, if you haven't tried comp, do give it a go. Join with the unit. Talk to people like Krez, jump on that MRBC Discord, engage in Battle for Midway and any of those other player-based tournaments that are happening. Do put your hand up if you can manage the time zone, because, the healthier the comp scene, I think the healthier the game in general.
Nice. Thanks for coming on, man.
Point 3, reporting task complete.
If you did enjoy this content, then please consider supporting us. You can do this in a multitude of ways, including subscribing to our podcast on your favourite podcast platform and leaving reviews, as well as subscribing to us on YouTube and liking our videos. You can also support us by sending us feedback either through comments, tweets, or directly through email. Tweet and follow us on Twitter at IncomingP, or email us directly at incomingmissilepodcast@gmail.com. You can also support us directly by becoming a patron or sponsor. You can find us on Patreon at Incoming Missile Podcast and choose one of 3 tiers of support. Patrons not only get mentioned on the podcast and get access to exclusive content, but can even join us as a guest host on the podcast. You can also opt to sponsor an episode through one-off donations, all of which will be used as giveaways for our listeners. So if you had a product, service, or content that you'd like us to mention, contact us to discuss sponsoring an episode. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We look forward to hearing from you. We appreciate you listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Shutdown sequence initiated.